Hey folks, super important seminar tonight. It's on adrenals, and adrenals involves everything. So this really important topic, we're going to talk about so many different things. I'm going to have Dr. Stacy do the introduction on how it works on an anatomical basis. I'm also going to have Dawn, our health coach, speak on some common pitfalls in recovery, and I'll hit all the major points of research, the very latest that's out there to help you recover from adrenal fatigue and what adrenal fatigue is really doing to you. So enjoy tonight's seminars. I'll have some words at the end as well. So stay tuned, enjoy, and learn. See you there. Would you believe, as I walked into this unruly class, I was just reminded of this. I remember in the Netherlands, when a teacher came in, bang, you're quiet, and you stood up and in unison said, hello, Mr. or Mrs., and then you had to sit down. And, yeah. It sounds rather quaint, doesn't it?
Okay, so let's all practice. No, I'm just kidding.
To get started, as people still filter in, I always like to just pull something from research. And I've got two tidbits here that I thought you'd find really interesting. Then we're going to have Dr. Stacy explain to us the anatomy of the whole adrenal system. And you'll soon see it's not just about the adrenals. And then I'll jump in and start covering all the basics about it. Don will jump in and go through some of the pitfalls and things to do at home, and then I'll wrap it up with nutraceuticals that are really important with adrenal fatigue. So fasten your seatbelts, here we go. Parkinson's. I saw and heard this really interesting presentation on Parkinson's. We treat Parkinson's here a lot. It is an environmental disorder that is where outside toxins, let's say you grew up near an apple orchard, farm, what have you, starts eventually accumulating in the fat cells, then gets re-released and starts affecting our nervous system. I saw this really interesting article that I then heard later presented that Parkinsonian symptoms can be greatly relieved by bicycling. Now, some of you know I'm a bit of a bike fan, so you know, yes, right? But bicycling seems to be when you're bicycling rather rapidly for fairly long amounts of time. We're talking half hour, sometimes even more. Seems to reprogram and bypass that part of the brain that causes all the tremors, the fasciculations, the inability to walk and even think. And we're having documented cases now. There's a big ongoing study in England where Parkinsonian symptoms is being reversed with bicycling. Wow. Amazing. Yeah? Add to that some awesome nutritional protocol. We did a seminar on that about, a year ago? It's online on YouTube, and you'll see how phenomenally well you can do things with Parkinsonians. I was in Washington, D.C. this past weekend, soaking up research, and I met up with a colleague of mine, Dr. Terry Walls, W-A-H-L-S. I first took note of her in 2006 when I met her out in Dallas, where we were having a big functional medicine symposium, an international gathering on neuroprotection. That was the topic, and all the world's experts were gathered together. And it was easy to spot her. She's a teaching professor and researcher at University of Iowa Medical School, and quite well known there. And she was reclined in an electric chair, just kind of buzzing around. And of course you take note, because not everyone comes in with this fancy electric chair. So I'm not shy. So I approached her and we talked and found that she had a very nasty progressive case of MS that had been diagnosed about a decade before and had now progressed to the point that she was just totally debilitated. She was able to stand for about 2 seconds to 3 seconds, so she was thankful for that. But that's about the extent of her physical capability, yet she still taught, which, wow. Here she was ready to explore some different things. She had already become a vegan, had seen some very positive results with that. She had written many top subjects. She had written many papers on subject of MS, on how the medication is pretty much useless in most cases. At best, prevents some relapses, but does not slow down the progression of MS. So she was bowled over by this medicine, what she heard that day. Here are the world's leading experts basically saying, lifestyle, diet, take out inflammatory foods, push the good fats. These are some of the nutraceuticals you use. She started putting them into play. She said her kids were laughing at her because she was studying day and night. She was acting all over like a student because she had to relearn all these things that we take for granted. Met up with her in Washington, D.C. So fast forward a decade later, not even a cane. Bicycles, 15 miles a day. Is a workaholic. Loves her work, does research. Not a sign of MS. Nobody wants to say cured because you can't cure MS. But I'd like you to know that in this clinic we have seen many of these cases of MS where there's no signs and symptoms anymore. So here you can go from a total reclining, almost totally paralyzed state to being completely well. And she showed case after case after case at University of Iowa Medical School where she's now doing what they're calling the Walls protocol. But really it's just functional medicine. And how, and they're showing videotapes, how in a matter of 3 months, 6 months, people are getting out of their chairs, able to walk, and within a year, it's just an amazing sight to see. And I applaud that because it's now penetrating into the annals of medicine and is no longer in the dark, dingy little corners like this office where it's kept secret. Ooh, no, you can't see. Here's a house. No. Yeah. So this is very much research-based. The top researchers are busy with this. We have big ongoing clinical trials with it right now, and I'm so excited about that. So I think I took more than enough time on this. We're going to take questions after on all these topics. And then Dr. Stacy, why don't you take it away and introduce us to what the adrenals look like, and we'll get down to business.
All right, why not? Why not? We decided to put up a beautiful diagram. Very busy, very busy. So my job is actually to introduce you to the hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal, and thyroid axis. So they all work together. This is one of the fun things. The things that we are leaving out is the gonadal. Anything to do with the ovaries or the testes are not added into this one. So basically we want to talk about what does stress do to these pieces of your body. Okay, so thyroid, adrenals sit on top of the kidneys like little sombrero hats, and the pituitary gland is within the brain, okay? So hypothalamus also. So what we're looking at here, hypothalamus is above the thalamus, sorry. So what we're looking at here is type of stress. Do I have a little button? Yay! So this stress could be physical stress, so physical activity, if we're overdoing or if we're just doing some sort of exercise, that is viewed as a stress on the body. This could be a traumatic stress, loss in the family, lost a job, any emotional stress. Electromagnetic comes in here, infections, so getting sick, allergies as well, and blood sugar is really kind of a big one here, and xenobiotic, which would be hormone. So that could be anything with synthetic hormones, it could be hormones added into food, whatever that may be. So the hypothalamus, there's negative and positive feedback loops. So negative feedback loops basically says it turns something off, positive means it's going to turn it on. So with the hypothalamus, basically what it does is releases corticotropin releasing hormone, and that's viewed by the sympathetic nervous system. So when a stress happens, the sympathetic nervous system turns on. The parasympathetic nervous system, which is what calms things down. So we think of the sympathetic nervous system as a fight or flight, okay? Running away from a bear as fast as we possibly can. So when you turn on the hypothalamus, you're going to turn on the CRH hormone, which then talks to the pituitary gland. And this is the anterior pituitary, which mainly is where all of these things happen, which then tells the adrenals, I'm going to produce ACTH, which then will tell the adrenals, hey, you know what? It's time to produce some glucocorticoids, which is your cortisol. And then that ultimately will then shunt over, as you see here, and will actually stop T4 from producing T3. So T4 is your inactive thyroid hormone, T3 is your more active thyroid hormone. So this is basically telling the thyroid to shh, but it's going to produce a lot of reverse T3. Okay, reverse T3 is like throwing on the brakes. We got a lot of cortisol in place, which ultimately then comes up, inhibits TSH. TSH is your thyroid stimulating hormone that comes from the pituitary, okay? So when this hypothalamus produces the CRH, it's also going to go over and tell the pituitary to tell the thyroid, shh, we don't need so much of that TSH, okay? Which then shuts down, slows down the T4 to T3 conversion. Now, if you have epinephrine and norepinephrine in here, that's a positive feedback and turns this back on. So if you have another stressor that comes on you, that's going to return on this entire cycle. So each time we have added stress, the pituitary will tell the thyroid, shh, the adrenals are doing their job. Okay, the adrenals are doing their job. Turn on your reverse T3, let's get that moving. Okay, so really basically when Dr. Denboer is going to talk tonight about adrenal stress, he's not only talking about how your adrenals are functioning. This will also talk about what the hypothalamus, the pituitary, and the thyroid have to do with this. Because another thing that comes in is cortisol is produced from, does anybody know what the backbone of cortisol is? Cholesterol. So it's produced from cholesterol. So some of the things that are very important in the diet are your good fats to support some of these balances. So if, say, you don't have enough good fat in your diet and you're producing a lot of inflammatory fat that you're eating, you can actually be driving the cortisol cycle and keeping the stress cycle rolling. So things that we want to think about, which I know Dawn is going to touch a little bit on some food and different things that are going to affect how you function with your adrenals, okay? So with that being said, I know this is a huge cycle, kind of crazy, but we're going to turn it over to Dr. Denboer and have him discuss where this goes from here and what else it can affect.
Can I let you in on a little secret? Adrenal fatigue is not just about the adrenals. The title is a little bit deceptive, honestly. But it's what most people, that's the label that most people put on it. As you can see with Dr. Stacy's presentation, it's a system-wide problem. And adrenal fatigue is characterized by a multi-system failure. It's not just about the adrenals, folks. It's easy to talk about it. It's not just about the adrenals. It's about what happens here. It's what happens to the cardiovascular system. It's what happens here. It's what happens to our hormones. It's what happens to our musculoskeletal system. I can go on and on and on. And these are all feedback loops that, yes, feed back to the adrenals, but also to the brain, also to the heart, everywhere. So we got to let go that it's only about the adrenals, but for convenience sake, it's nice to call it that. So I want to change that perception just a little bit. And Hans Selye, the father of stress, McGill University, 1930s is where he did his research and published all his research on stress, was able to prove that the adrenals produces something called cortisol, which he then proved was a sugar regulating hormone. And it got overworked, and he was able to dissect it in mice that he stressed badly, kind of mean, and was able to prove that the adrenals would just shrink. What he didn't really look at was that other organs suffered as well. So here we are, all these years later, still stuck on just the adrenals. That's why you can do blood tests and your doctor will just laugh at you. Adrenal fatigue? Pff, that doesn't exist. It's not out there. And that is because we don't have a blood test that measures for adrenal fatigue. We have adrenal diseases such as Cushing's and Addison's, on both on opposite sides of the spectrum. We can test for that, but we cannot test for true adrenal fatigue with blood work. Salivary work or urine work is a different story. But that's why you often get to naysayers in this whole topic, because it's not just about one thing. So, to the body, a stress is a stress is a stress. But there's 3 phases, and I'll get into that in a bit. There's 3 different phases towards the true exhaustion. And the first one is just the alarm phase. And we're good at that. And the adrenals and the rest of our body is designed to withstand that hit. It's a beautiful thing. Because what happens is with the alarm phase, let's say somebody just almost gets into an accident with you, right? You're riding on the East Belt line, and you see it coming. So you just make this quick reflex, whoa, how did I do that, right? It's that beautiful, quick little response, and you don't even know how you did that to avoid that accident. Right? Heart rate just went up. You had this immediate secretion of cortisol. And this immediate secretion of cortisol just shut everything else down except the very immediate things that you needed to do. It rushed sugar to your nervous system, to your muscles, and just in the past year we're also finding that that secretion has to happen really quickly in the brain as well. And you can't get quite fast enough from adrenals, which sit here to your brain fast enough for you to have split-second decision. So we've got our own little alarm system in the brain, and we secrete cortisol there as well. Yeah? So we are flooded with this immediate brightness, ability to do something at the expense of other things, right? Everything else gets shut down. So what happens is your immune system gets shut down. At that point, it's non-essential. Okay? The point is to make it through the next 5 minutes. So let's not worry about the immune system. This is why after a stressful event, the next day or the day after, oftentimes a patient will be stricken with the flu, cold, or some sort of crisis, even an autoimmune disease trigger. And I see them here, where they're happy, just dancing into the office 1 month, and the next month when I see them, crippled, and I mean crippled with rheumatoid arthritis, full blown. And it happened overnight. And I've seen that in more than a few occasions due to a sudden surge shutting down and changing the immune system. So it can have catastrophic effects. You also get something what's called a hormone steal. Because we need all that cortisol to be produced all of a sudden, you steal it from other hormones. Right? All hormones have, like Dr. Stacey said, cholesterol as their backbone. So the body just goes, yeah, I want more of that, and all hormone levels drop. Now let's say that we're dealing with a more sustained alarm. Right? Drip, drip, drip. So more constant stress. And it can come from many different areas. Now all of a sudden, we're starting to weaken our resistance, okay? We're good at this whole cortisol shock, and we can often recover from that, except in those few cases that I talked about. But when you're into an irritated state, you're going to see sugar fluctuations. Great one day, the next day, can't believe how tired I am after that breakfast. What just happened there? You become more reactive to foods. Your hormones, libido, done, gone. You start snapping at people. Your neurotransmitters are starting to change. You become more volatile. And everyone is different, right? Whatever your characteristic is, it's accentuated. So if you're a little bit more prone to slightly more blues, it's going to go deeper. If you're a little bit more volatile, you're going to see more of that. Whatever your personal characteristics are. And then when you go long enough, let's say there's marital discord for a year or longer. Exhaustion. And now we're getting into some nasty signs and symptoms. Insomnia being one of them. We can always tell because on a physical, when a new patient comes in, of course they complain about fatigue, and we get that a lot, as you can imagine. It's one of the more common presentations. But we check the blood pressure. I mean, we check the blood pressure. Okay, we got this blood pressure sitting, then we stand them up, check it again. Uh-oh, we had just had a 12-point drop. What just happened there? The adrenals were unable to kick in enough cortisol to tighten up what it was supposed to tighten up so you could maintain or even raise your blood pressure temporarily. It wasn't able to do that. It's in a state of exhaustion. And these are the people that you can pretty much guess that they wake up at 3 o'clock on the nose every night. Some people it's 3:30, right? And the reason for that is the adrenals do many, many things, including sugar regulation. And what you get then when you wake up at 3 o'clock or 3:30 in the morning is nocturnal hypoglycemia, which is just a fancy word for saying nighttime low blood sugar level, which wakes up your brain and it thinks it's morning time. Not good, because you just needed that sleep to truly rebuild you from exhaustion, and you're not getting it. And it becomes this cycle. So what you get with that is obesity. Well, what does obesity have to do with it? You get the sugar dysregulation. What happens with sugar dysregulation? You get insulin resistance, right? The body has to start producing so much insulin that eventually doesn't even listen to insulin anymore. All the fat starts going through here more, right? Organ fat. We call that visceral adipose tissue. And insulin, when it gets raised to such a level, also causes inflammation. So wherever that patient is genetically the weakness or old injuries or whatever abuse they're undergoing right now, that's where inflammation is going to hit. So if you're prone to, say, eczema, you had eczema when you're little, guess what? Eczema and psoriasis all of a sudden are bad. Back. If rheumatoid arthritis runs really strong in the family, that could be a trigger. Same thing, so I can go on and on about all these different things. Cardiovascular disorder is huge on this list, because there's a whole vein of thought coming from the Cleveland Heart Clinic that 90% of cardiovascular disorders really is sugar dysregulation. Nothing to do with cholesterol. They're the ones that did the research behind the fish oil that we have here called Omega-10, which, what does it do? Decreases your insulin response by 40% within 6 weeks. That's how they open up arteries. They're really regulating sugar. Yeah? So, and then you can see it becomes this multi-system failure, doesn't it? And a lot of people have a lot of different things. From hormone imbalance to inflammation, and then that becomes a stress in and of itself. Because once, for instance, just to take a little tidbit, if your body fat creeps over 30%, all of a sudden it becomes inflammatory fat. There's this weird conversion that occurs, and now you become inflamed 24/7 because your body fat's over 30%. And that then becomes a stressor. So on and on and on it goes. So what really is stress? Where does it come from? Well, to the body, it really doesn't matter where it really comes from. As silly as it may sound, a professional athlete that's overtraining may be stressing their system as much as the next door neighbor who's undergoing marital discord. And it shows up in the same fashion. It's just the reason is different, that's all. So the mental-spiritual connection is absolutely huge. And it's also one of the toughest ones to tackle, isn't it? It really is. But it's something, we are mental, spiritual, physical beings, right? It just blends together. You cannot separate them apart. I just had a patient this afternoon who came in with a list. She had an entire page listed full of all her symptoms and emergency room visits she'd had this year, for all of her symptoms. So I'm looking at that, and I'm saying, because I want to be really careful with this, because I don't want to be one of these doctors that blames everything on stress, because a lot of doctors do this. Well, can't figure it out, must be stress, right? I said, well, there's got to be something going on that's really stressing your body, and it's exhibiting in different ways, and the fire just keeps on popping up in different places. And I told her, yeah, we're good at treating those things. You know that. I have a nutraceutical for that. I have an exercise for that, a great adjustment for that. Says, and I'm happy to put out those fires. Absolutely thrilled. It's a privilege. But these fires keep on erupting. What is truly going on? And then she broke down and told me that her second marriage is, and on the story goes. Right? It's a Chinese torture thing. Drip, 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 and then the fire starts coming out in different areas. So the mental, spiritual, if there's a spiritual emptiness, we're very, I was struck by an article this past week of this 62-year-old that just was jailed 30 years ago for a drug conviction, a very famous race driver. And I was struck by the picture of him going into jail and coming out of jail, a much older man now. And he looked terrific. Going, wow, he almost looks younger there than when he went in. How did that happen? And he was in one of the most notorious jails in Texas, where he had been beaten and abused and had gone to court, which is why he got an early release, because of that. And then, so I couldn't help but dig into the article, and it was found that he had found spiritual contentment, had learned how to meditate, and had embraced some techniques that is part of our major religions, isn't it? That helps us process and find more inner peace and happiness. And it showed. For some, it was huge. So, another stress is nutrient-poor diet. Wow, is that a big one here? Wow, is that a big one? Here we are, overflowing in this land with calories. And yet we are so burdened by nutritional deficiencies. 80% of us have measurable blood nutrient deficiencies. And when it shows up in the blood, it is advanced, because that's not a very good test for nutritional deficiencies at all. And our macronutrient imbalance, meaning proteins, fats, and carbs, the imbalance of what we consume is so tipped way over here. It is incredible. I saw a chart this weekend on a 100-year change in macronutrients, what we eat, and autoimmune diseases that go with it. And it followed it exactly. As our carbs, especially refined carbs, grew from 1900 to now, and went up from 6 pounds of sugars to 143 pounds per person. It went from 3.5 pounds of flour, I was shocked how little it was, to now I believe it was 90 pounds of flour. You know, it's just amazing, the statistics. But right up there with the chart, exactly the same, was obesity and autoimmune disease. Pretty simple to figure that one out, causing huge discord in our bodies. And Don will talk to you about that a little bit, on how to bring back some of that balance. But it's not just the macronutrients, but it's also the micronutrients. There's Dr. Terry Walls that I was talking about that had MS. Her goal per year is to consume 200 different varieties of vegetables every year. I'm going, ooh, I have work to do. I thought I was doing good. On top of that, she consumes 8 cups of that every day. Wow. I have some work to do. Yeah? And yes, she's not afraid to eat animal proteins, but it is a 100% organic, grass-fed, super clean stuff. And of course, lots of good fats. Lots of good fats. Nutrient-rich diet. Follow the rainbow diet. Colors, colors, colors. If it grew, eat it as it grew, not in some weird little package. Packages are evil. Blood sugar imbalance, I touched on that. It's a huge stressor. 1/3 of our teenagers are now pre-diabetic or diabetic. Okay, it is a catastrophe. Caffeine, alcohol, toxicity. So toxicity, you have to watch yourself. You have to be your own advocate. And what is toxicity? It is some of the man-made chemicals that we've added to food, most of which are now illegal in all of Europe. I am struck by how pastries and candy looks different when I go back to the Netherlands. It's not nearly as vivid. And then I look at what some kids are chewing here and say, my, your tongue even looks blue, right? And so these artificial food colors, not legal there. Artificial sweeteners, not legal there, right? MSG can be a huge toxin for some people. Some of these preservatives, just if it has preservatives in it, don't eat it. You don't need it. The best preservative is eating it quickly. Yeah? Alcohol has become a real big issue in this country. And especially your hard liquors, you have to be careful with. Some red wine here and there, fine. Be careful with that stuff. Caffeine. Caffeine is a big one. Where I was in Washington D.C., I think within a 4-block circle there was at least 8 Starbucks. And that's just Starbucks. I mean, there's other coffee shops too. And is that a sign of an addicted nation or not? And so I'm not absolutely against coffee. If you have adrenal exhaustion, adrenal fatigue of some sort, yes, I am against it, because you are punching an adrenal to do what it can't do anymore, right? It's not a good thing at that point, and it really just creates more problems. I have the occasional cup of coffee. I don't at all feel guilty. It's high quality, it's organic, it's clean, and no, I don't need it. Yeah? If you need coffee, there's a problem. If it's there to enjoy, I have a great time enjoying it. It's great. It's not a huge issue. So, inflammation. 70 to 80% of inflammation comes from the gut, and gut only. Leaky gut syndrome, which is a whole other topic, is a huge, huge stressor. We have become a nation that has become so inflamed, and it's mostly because our guts are so off kilter. Antibiotics, medications, eating the refined foods, too much sugar, having become sensitive to foods that have been genetically modified. When genetically modified soy was introduced in Europe, it was yanked and made illegal within a year. You know why? Because statistically, emergency room visits went up 3-fold in 1 year when it was introduced for gastrointestinal problems. They figured it out, gone. Yeah? Why should we eat it? Overtraining, a big problem. If you look at our muscle and endurance seminar, I touch on that quite extensively. Blake shows the basic exercises, and I go into the signs of overtraining. There's a bunch of really cool tools. Heart rate variability, your resting heart rate in the morning. Overtraining is a really big problem, actually. And I see decreasing muscle mass in spite of more sophisticated ways of exercising. And that's why I love doing these BIAs on these athletes to make sure that they're not overdoing it and thus going into self-destruct zone. It's a big stressor. And of course, the big one, sleep deprivation. Absolutely huge. Sleep is when detoxification occurs. Sleep is when neurotransmitters get reset. Sleep is when we build muscle. Sleep is when our immune system is regenerated. Sleep is when hormones are rebalanced. And it's the very thing that goes south when adrenals become fatigued and thus perpetuates the cycle. And we'll talk about that too and how to reverse some of that. So really what we have to do is balance what's imbalanced. And oftentimes it's many things. So what do? You choose the most important ones. And I would love Don to come up here and share with us a program that we have designed and we're really proud of. It is actually the latest program on adrenal fatigue, on how to revive the adrenals. We've been rolling out programs for so long now. It's become quite a book, and I'm really proud of that. Each program is very appropriate. If you're interested in it, we call it DBC Life. All the different programs that we teach in health coaching are in here, Don is in the trenches working with these patients and knows some of the pitfalls and the worries and the things that are just not working and what's practical to overcome it. So I would love Don to just give us a voice from the trenches. Sure. and just really give us some insight into what's difficult and what's easy. And Don, by the way, is not a shining example for adrenal revival today. She's worked here since 6:30, right? Had a 45-minute lunch, and she's still alive and kicking.
Yeah.
Look at her go.
Thank you. So with adrenal renewal, dealing with adrenal fatigue, sometimes we have to work to create balance. That's our goal, right? So for me today to create balance, I do have a few cheat notes, and that's just going to be okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the process that we use here for adrenal dealing with adrenal fatigue, some of the steps that we take to deal with that, and then talk about some of the challenges maybe that people have through that. I'm really glad you're here. Adrenal fatigue is something we see a lot here in the office because it's very common and it's very difficult to deal with. It takes a lot of time to recover from adrenal fatigue, and that makes it one of the more challenging things to work with because we all want to be better months ago, right? And this takes some time. 9 months to a year is kind of the common, wouldn't you say? Once you get into that state of adrenal fatigue, you're talking 9 months to a year. So you have to just be patient in that process. We really want to come alongside you and come alongside our patients, working on making lifestyle changes to help support that adrenal function. We come alongside using also the help of the DBC doctors with the supplement support for that purpose. Making lifestyle change requires intentionality. It requires work. I know lots of you in here have made pretty significant lifestyle changes, and you know that that takes a lot of work. So we want to come alongside you, help you with those changes that maybe are sometimes temporary, but also sorting through some of those changes that need to become permanent in your life. So we do lots of problem solving, lots of figuring out what habits need to be tweaked a little bit. Changing behaviors, changing patterns of the things that you do. So when we do that, we kind of go through a step-by-step process for Adrenal Renew. That first step is really nutrition-based. So I know Dr. Boer has hit pretty hard on that, the importance of nutrition in what we're doing. So that may be for you, if you're having leaky gut and food sensitivities, we may look at more of an anti-inflammatory food plan. If we're dealing with blood sugar and having those times when you're waking up at night or accumulating this belly fat, we may look at something more like Nourish food plan. Those are in here if you have interest in what they are, but we make it very individual for you. Here at DBC, no one fits in a box. Everyone's different, so we want to find the nutrition plan that's going to work best for you. Our next step in that Adrenal Renew process is really sitting down with you and doing some further education, teaching some of these things that we talked about tonight. What happens with that HPA axis? What happens with those hormones? What state of adrenal fatigue am I in? Am I in alarm? Am I in exhaustion? Am I all the way in fatigue? Just learning what that is. It's very empowering when you can understand what's happening in your body, and that helps give you the resolve to move forward and get well. So we just feel like that education part of it is very important. And then when you're meeting with a health coach, if you're doing that Adrenal Renew program, we also have a questionnaire that we fill out that can sort of help us pinpoint what are those areas in my life that we really need to focus most significantly on. Then we begin to look at blood sugar balance. So we have a whole time that we talk about blood sugar balance. How do we bring that about? I know Dr. Boer talked about that cortisol-insulin relationship. So what kinds of foods do I need to eat? When should I be eating them? How should I be eating them? So we go through that whole process there. Next step would be to hit inflammation. What are things in my life, specifically for me, that are creating an inflammatory process? And then we dive in and figure out, how can we change that? How can we make things better there? The next step would be covering sleep and exercise. These are huge. If you have ever had adrenal fatigue or know someone that has, sleep is a struggle. Sometimes it's so hard to fall asleep, or you have that waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning and you are ready to go, and then at 3 o'clock in the afternoon all you want to do is crawl in bed. How do you deal with that on a practical basis? And we really dive in and talk about sleep hygiene And what are some of the other things that I do habitually that can help me move into better sleep? Exercise is the same. When you have adrenal fatigue, lots of questions come up. Do I exercise? Don't I exercise? How much exercise? When should I exercise? What kind of exercise should I do? Very individual again for people. So we can really sit down with you as an individual and figure out what's going to be best for you in those stages of healing. Lastly, then we hit that mental, emotional part of it. It's a huge part of dealing with adrenal fatigue, and so we can dive in with you and kind of talk about some of those things, work through some of those things. I know the other health coach, Jamie, she had a patient recently who went through this program with her, and in the end decided that she was working too many jobs, and one of the things that she needed to do was change jobs, and that's a very, very hard decision to make, but in the end really was a positive thing for her through that process. Anytime we go about making change, it's hard. Who likes to make change? I don't. It's hard. Whether it's nutrition, exercise, sleep, changing inflammatory processes in our life, it's hard. And so it's helpful to come alongside and get some of that support. It's also helpful to have accountability. So when you're meeting with someone on a regular basis, that can help you make those goals and then hold you accountable to make those changes, because you know you're going to come in, we're going to talk through that. And we can also problem solve when you're not able to meet your goals, help you through that process, having some of those hard conversations, right? I had an appointment last week with a gal who lives out of state. She's starting the Adrenal Renew program. And in that beginning part, she's a long-term patient of Dr. Boer's, doing really well with nutrition. And what we found out as we talked, there were some things that she could change a little bit to make it better. And then we began to talk about goals. What does she want to accomplish? And we talked about finding joy in the journey. Ever hear that statement? Her goal through this process is to be happy making lifestyle change. Knowing that even though she's not feeling optimally, she wants to find happiness in knowing that she's doing what's right for her body, because in the end, she knows she's going to feel better. Kind of reminded me of Dr. Boer sometimes talking about patients when we're going through adrenal fatigue and these kinds of things that take a while to resolve. It's sort of like your dance partner, and you have to dance with it, and sometimes you're going to flow beautifully and other times you're going to get your feet stepped on. That's that process of healing. And so we are privileged to come alongside you and help you kind of decipher through that process at a time when you're not feeling well, tired, brain fog, right? And so we can help you really pinpoint that. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Dr. Boer.
Awesome. What part of change do you think is most difficult for people?
So when we make change, there's usually that sort of that recognition, that pre-contemplation that I need to make the change. Then we contemplate it and we think about it, and then we need to move into that action. Mm-hmm. That's the hardest part, is actually doing it. I had a conversation with one of our boot camp patients today. We've been working together for probably about 5 months now, and she does not want to exercise. And our conversation today was a little bit of a tough one. She has actually in boot camp done marvelously. She's lost 25 pounds. She looks 10 years younger. You know who I'm talking about. It's really exciting, and she's just feeling great. She has so much more energy. Her stress levels are down because of the way she's eating and taking care of her body that way. But she knows that exercise is the next step. And I finally said to her, we've been talking about it. We've been thinking about it. You need to go home and do it. So I was a little bit of a thorn in her flesh, but to answer your question, sometimes we need that, Dr. Boer. Yes. To answer your question, that action part, putting it into work,
absolutely, and
then maintaining that is a challenge.
Well, I'm just wincing a bit because I spent 10 minutes on it too.
She got both barrels.
Yes. But it was well received, and that's so appreciated, because our patients are our family. We are dance partners, and the dance of life is not always a joy, but here we are dancing, and we're there with them. And it's whether it's an encouraging partner or accountability partner. So when you get a multi-system failure going on, where do you start? Right? And sometimes you just pick the low-hanging fruit, whatever is easiest first. Sometimes you just do. And if it's stopping pop, then it's stopping pop. If it's a 10-minute walk a day, then it's a 10-minute walk. The thing with this thing is ready, fire, aim. And yes, it's not ready, aim, fire. It's ready, fire, aim. Just get there, do something, and then we can start fine-tuning it. Because the trouble with when you're discombobulated like this, indecision is part of that. And you get brain fog. You can't think clearly. So you just jump in and do it. Easier said than done, I know. I have found one thing to be very true when we get a multi-system failure like this. This is the patient that needs super nutrients in food and nutraceuticals. Usually in these seminars we do for our patients, we focus very much on the exercise component, on the lifestyle component, and very little on the nutraceutical. This seminar is a little different because the adrenals and thyroid and pituitary and hypothalamus and the insulin resistance and the atherosclerosis and the autoimmune disease and obesity and on and on and on and on that it goes, the hormonal problems, the memory problems, all the things that go with this, do not easily reverse themselves with just food and lifestyle changes. They just don't. It needs an extra kick. And if you saw what Dr. Terry Walls is taking, the one that I was talking with this weekend, she was mildly complaining. She says, in order to achieve this, I have to take a whole handful of vitamins 3 times a day. And it was something like 112 of them when she counted them, right? But look at her. Now, I'm not saying that's the norm at all, okay? I'm not saying that. But she obviously was a very special case. So we want to hit especially the insomnia, the emotional, the inflammation, and the sugar. And you take your pick within your adrenal fatigue symptoms, which one is most important, which one is second, and which one is third. And then you focus on that. You can use us as a resource. So these are some of the more common things that we work with. So these are the greatest hits as far as adrenal fatigue goes. Exhilarine. It's holy basil and ashwagandha. Ashwagandha has been used for thousands of years. When something's been around for thousands of years, you know there's got to be something to it, right? It's not just a fad. We don't do folk medicine here. We only use what's been proven, clinically written up in the science journals. We know how it works. So if you have 1,000+ years history behind it, that's even that much the better, right? Ashwagandha is one of those. It buffers the effects of excess cortisol. It protects the adrenals. And if a patient is really complaining of brain fog, Exhilarine is what we utilize. It's a patient that I imagine has problems on the east belt line being cut off 8 times a day. Does that make sense? And a cortisol response to it every time. Well, Serenogen is a little bit different. This is for the tired but wired patient. And the Rehmannia that's in there, and it's Schizandra, is just really soothing for one of these patients that the adrenals, they just don't know how to come down anymore. It's just kind of like this constant buzz. Can't sleep at night, but don't have enough energy during the day. I'm just kind of tired but wired. Yeah? Very nervous and anxious, and almost always their cholesterol is up. Hot flashes and menopause. Adderset is one of our biggest hitters. This is ginseng and rhodiola. Almost all of you have heard of that, ginseng. Tired, depressed, very chronically fatigued, just done. And honestly, it's our no-brainer also, because it's what we call an adaptogen. I love adaptogens. I sleep well at night because I know when I gave my patients an adaptogen, I'm right every time. Why? Because if it's too high, it brings it down low. If it's too low, it brings it up this way. It just normalizes. So if I don't have a clue, adaptogen. I usually have a clue. Licorice Plus. So licorice is an interesting one. This one has a long known use for patients whose adrenals are specifically burnt out. And now I'm talking about adrenals, not multi-system. Are specifically burnt out by steroid cortisone use. Okay? I don't know what's going on out there in the annals of medicine right now, but it seems like steroids are the new antibiotic. It's just being thrown left and right at everything. And doctors, get a clue, please, because you are doing so much ruining of the immune system, of moods, of the adrenal function. All that for temporary relief of an itch. So this is a very potent, damaging drug that is a last resort drug that will rescue lives. I totally celebrate that aspect of it. But should not be used if you can't figure out what the disease thing, whatever's going on. It should not be used. Here it's being used left and right. You can protect or bring back the adrenals using licorice. Another nice use for it, it also takes care of overgrowth in the gut. So off-label use there. Which then causes the joint pain, tired and achy, and takes care of the GI complaints. Nucera is pretty cool. It is from Europe. A lot of the research was actually originally done at University of Groningen in the northern part of the Netherlands. Casein tryptic hydroxylate acts as an antagonist to cortisol, binds to it, and its effect is immediate. They say for some people, the ultimate stress is public speaking. For some people, right? These are the people that would do phenomenally well chewing 1 or 2 Nuceras right before the speech. Brings it to normal, doesn't dull them, doesn't drug them, doesn't make you sleepy, just normalizes that cortisol response. Some people cannot come down from stress at night, right? They're just wound up, Nucera. So it's a for the moment type of remedy, and that's what some people need. Adrenogen is the sledgehammer. There's nothing left in adrenals. It's just done. Deep, deep fatigue. Everything is low. Can't remember anything, can't function. We have to do a rescue. That's adrenogen. Adrenal 5 is more elegant because it works on the entire system that Dr. Stacy talked about. The brain signaling to the thyroid, signaling to the adrenals, and it works on that entire triad, rebuilding communication pathways between those, yeah, and rebalancing them. Have you ever noticed how many thyroid problems are out there? It really is a brain problem, an adrenal problem, and an inflammation problem. It's not a thyroid problem. It's just the thyroid responding correctly to that situation. So then they get support medication, and yes, they feel better for now, but the underlying processes are not corrected. That's Adrenal 5. Another really big hitter, I know I'm covering a lot, is Cavanase. If you're not sleeping, this will get you sleeping. This will break that cycle, and it's often one of the first things we do when a patient comes in, because if they're not sleeping, we're not going to get them well. We're just not going to get them well. You have to sleep. Trouble falling asleep? It'll do it. Waking up at 3 o'clock, you might still wake up, but you'll fall right back asleep again. It works virtually every time. It is amazing, amazing. It's put out by a company called Neurologics that all they do is brain and adrenal and thyroid research. It's all they do. So they really know their stuff. So At one point, when I was a graduate student, and my wife was a fellow graduate student, we were married at the time, and guess what? We decided that we're going to have kids. 2 of them, in fact. Ah, yes. Well, that became a little overwhelming. No parents around, no family around. We're just kind of an island to ourselves. We're running out of money. Okay, get a job. Still running out of money. Leona, my wife, got a job. Still going to school full time. Still wasn't making it. Okay, I'll take the night shifts. Finally, the end of the story was working 38 hours a week, night shift, doing some other things on the side, full-time student, and dad. 5 years straight. Yeah, this is not a sob story, this is just kind of a humor story in a way. We soon decided, because I was further ahead, that okay, maybe we should put Leona's education on hold for now while we forge forward. She's still working, but the 2 kids, they were just demanding, and they did not like daycare. Disaster every time. So, forged forward, done with that graduate degree after 5 years. And then it comes time to delve into life. Not. Strep, form of hepatitis, mono, all within the same month. Totally broke down my resistance. Kind of climbed out of that, kind of, and was left with a fatigue that was unbelievably debilitating. Just adrenal fatigue. I remember being so tired, we're talking now 3-4 months into it, that I would just sit there in a chair and stop breathing because I was too tired to breathe. I would just give myself a break from breathing. So overwhelming. If I was kind of a jock most of my life, don't know what happened there, but I couldn't even walk. It would make me ill. If the temperature was above 75 degrees outside, I'd become ill because my liver couldn't withstand the temperature change. So it took just little steps, just tiny walks, just a little bit of weightlifting, super nutrients. I didn't have access to this yet because it didn't exist. And just gradually rebuilding. And folks, I'm telling you, with persistence, yes, it took that 1 year that you're talking about. And luckily been blessed with abundant physical and mental energy that has allowed us to do what we do today. You can come out of this. But man, it takes some pulling. And we're here to help you pull, give you those tools, and forge forward. It is so critical that you come out the other side, because otherwise you're basically leading a handicapped life. And there's a life to live out there. So focus on those stressors. What are they? Remove what can be removed. Renourish with renourishing whatever lifestyle change it needs. Even one step this way and one step that way will start making a difference. And slowly on, you'll get traction. This is not an overnight thing. Remember, you're dealing with a multi-system failure that needs to be put back on its feet step by step by step by step. So go for it. Not the most fun process, but every day is a new day. And every day is a dance to be celebrated in its own way. So there it is. Thank you. So here we are at the end of the seminar. And you're saying, well, how on earth am I going to get my adrenals back to where they should be? It's called creating islands of peace, huh? We have 5 kids, a busy practice. Leona runs the show at the office in the background. You may not have noticed her, but she does. And so in that busy life, you just create moments and just celebrate everything. Even going to the grocery store, going to your garden. Notice my garden is not that big. It's handy. I've tried to not become a slave to things. And we often go for walks together whenever we can outside. We spend a lot of time outside and just celebrate moments. Even the hour before going to bed, spend talking, reading together. And obviously, those are the things you do if you have a spouse, but you can create islands of peace with friends. If you have a deck, there's an island of peace. We have tea together oftentimes, and we just create these moments that I absolutely love. And with 5 kids, you got to create these islands of peace. So I feel that there's so much that you can do just with bike riding. I don't know, what is your favorite thing to do? Huh? It's being edited.
I thought we were going to have a shot of us cutting stuff together, and
We
I
are.
was going to have other talking in the background. Like
No. This is the conclusion of the seminar.